My name's Robert. I'm telling you this story because I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what happened. I don't know if you'd believe me if I told you everything, but trust me, it was real. It all started when I bought that house. I had no idea it would change my life, or rather, that it would ruin it. I should have listened to the warnings. It wasn't that the house was particularly cheap, but compared to most places in the area, the price was surprisingly low. This old, secluded property stood alone on the edge of town. It had the kind of aura that made you wonder why nobody had bought it before. I figured it was just another foreclosure, a house that people didn't want because of some rumors. I wasn't superstitious, so I signed the papers. The first few days were uneventful, almost peaceful. I was excited to move into my new home, away from the chaos of city life. The house had character, old wood floors that creaked in a way that I thought was charming, and large windows that let the sunlight flood in. I spent the first few nights there unpacking and getting settled. Nothing unusual. But then it started. It was around midnight on the third night when I first heard the footsteps. I thought maybe it was the house settling, but they were too distinct, too deliberate. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging. As though someone was moving across the floor just beneath my bedroom. I froze. I got out of bed, half convinced it was the wind or some rodent in the walls. But no, the sounds were too specific. And they were coming from the kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. The kitchen was empty. No one was there. The floor was still and quiet. Maybe it was a pipe or the house itself shifting, I thought. But the next night, the same thing happened again. This time, I wasn't alone in the house. My friend Eric, who was helping me settle in, heard it too. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I didn't need to answer. The look on his face said everything. We both went downstairs. The kitchen was still empty, but it felt colder. The air had that heavy, suffocating presence, as though someone or something was lurking in the shadows. That's when we noticed something odd. The kitchen door, which led to the basement, was slightly ajar. I had never noticed the basement door before. It wasn't something I planned on using anytime soon. But there it was, standing open. I thought it was just another oddity of the house. Maybe the movers had left it that way or something. But Eric's eyes widened when he saw it. "I don't think we should go down there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a chill to his words that I had never heard before. I laughed it off, trying to convince him that we were just being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. But curiosity, as always, got the better of me. I grabbed the flashlight again, and we descended into the darkness. The stairs creaked beneath our feet as we descended into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, and the oppressive silence seemed to suffocate any remaining breath. The flashlight's beam barely cut through the blackness, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift with an unnatural fluidity. Eric stayed close behind me, his hand brushing mine for a second before he pulled away like he'd touched something that burned. I didn't blame him. The further down we went, the more I felt it. The overwhelming sense of being watched, of something lingering in the darkness, just waiting for us to reach the bottom. The basement was cramped, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets, and boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. Nothing particularly strange at first glance, but there was something off about it. The smell was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't the typical musty smell of an old, unused basement. It was something worse, something putrid like rot. "Are you sure we should be down here?" Eric asked, his voice shaking. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel that way too. I shone the flashlight around the room, trying to make sense of the disarray. That's when I saw it. A large, antique mirror standing at the far end of the basement, its surface cracked and dulled with age. But what caught my attention wasn't the mirror itself. It was the reflection. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing behind us in the reflection. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was no one there. Just Eric, looking just as confused as I was. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Eric nodded, though his face was pale. "Yeah, I saw it too." We stood there, frozen, staring at the mirror, trying to convince ourselves that it was just our minds playing tricks on us. But the feeling of being watched, that hadn't gone away. It had only grown stronger. Without thinking, I took a step toward the mirror. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I had to know. As I got closer, the temperature in the room dropped even more, and I could see my breath in the air. But when I looked into the mirror, I didn't see my reflection right away. The glass was clouded, fogged over as if it had been untouched for years. Then, just as I was about to turn away, something moved in the reflection. A figure, tall with gaunt features and eyes that glowed like embers, stepped into view behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribcage, but again, there was nothing. Just the empty basement and Eric standing there, looking equally terrified. We both stared at each other for a long moment, neither of us saying a word. But then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper from somewhere behind me. A voice I couldn't understand, but that was unmistakably there. "Get out," it said, louder this time. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Eric's arm, and without another thought, I dragged him back up the stairs. We didn't speak as we fled from the basement. We didn't need to. The look on his face mirrored my own, a mix of fear and disbelief. We slammed the basement door shut behind us, but as I turned to look back at the stairs, I could have sworn I saw something move down there, just out of sight, lingering in the dark. We didn't talk much after that. Eric stayed the night, but neither of us slept. The entire time, we were both wide awake, staring at the shadows in the corners of the room as if expecting something to emerge from them. Every creak of the floorboards made us jump. Every gust of wind outside felt like a warning. The following day, Eric left early. I think he was as shaken as I was, but he didn't want to admit it. He kept saying that we were just imagining things, that it was an old house, and old houses creak and groan. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house, and I hadn't been since the moment I moved in. That night, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I went back to the basement. I know it sounds crazy, but I needed answers. I needed to know if it was all in my head or if there was something truly sinister at play. And that mirror, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It had called to me, somehow, pulling me back like an invisible force. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated, but I pushed forward. Couldn't back out now. I made my way down the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand. The basement was just as cold as it had been the night before, but this time, there was no smell of rot. The air was thick with silence, but there was a palpable tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I approached the mirror again, my heart hammering in my chest. The closer I got, the more I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. I couldn't breathe as easily. My head felt dizzy, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. When I shone the light on the mirror this time, the reflection wasn't just me. It wasn't just my own tired, anxious face. There was something else there. A figure standing just to the side, its body hunched and obscured by shadows, but its eyes glowed faintly, like the embers of a fire slowly dying out. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, the flashlight dropping from my hand and rolling across the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned to run, but before I could even reach the stairs, a cold hand closed around my wrist. I yanked myself free, my pulse racing. I looked around, but there was no one, only the echo of my own frantic breaths. The house felt alive now, pulsing with a presence that wasn't human. Something was in here with me, and it wasn't going to let me leave. I didn't stop running. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat, and I slammed the basement door behind me. I pressed my back against it, trying to steady myself, but all I could hear were the whispers. Soft, unintelligible voices coming from the depths of the house. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The thing is, the more I stayed in that house, the worse it got. The voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were clear, and they started following me. I'd hear them in the corners of rooms, in the walls, under the floorboards. They'd call my name, sometimes softly, sometimes louder, but always just close enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. But no matter how many times I packed up my things, every time I tried to leave, the door would be locked. The windows sealed shut. I was trapped. And then came the worst part, the thing that made me finally realize I was never meant to leave. One morning, as I walked through the house, I heard a voice. A voice that sounded too close, too familiar, called to me. I walked toward it, not thinking, almost as if I were sleepwalking. It led me back to the basement, and I couldn't resist. The door opened on its own, and I descended once again. But this time there was no mirror. Instead, there was a chair, a wooden chair, old and battered, in the center of the basement. The floor around it was stained with something dark, something that made my stomach churn. And sitting in that chair, facing me, was a figure I knew all too well, my own reflection. But it wasn't me. Not anymore. It was twisted, contorted. Its eyes, dark and hollow, locked with mine as a grin spread across its face. One that wasn't mine. It wasn't human. "Sit down," it whispered. The voice was mine, but not mine. It was distorted, jagged, like something was clawing at the edges of my sanity. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And before I knew it, the figure stood and walked toward me, its feet dragging across the floor with that same sickening sound I'd heard so many nights before. And then, everything went black. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed. I could feel the weight of the blankets on top of me, and the soft glow of morning sunlight spilling in through the window. Everything seemed normal, too normal, like nothing had happened at all. But the feeling, that feeling in the pit of my stomach told me that something was terribly wrong. I got out of bed, but my legs were shaky. My head throbbed with a dull pain, like a constant reminder that whatever I had experienced wasn't just a bad dream. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had passed out from the stress, the fear. Maybe I was just exhausted from everything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I made my way downstairs, my steps slow, tentative. I tried to shake off the dizziness, but it only grew worse as I approached the kitchen. The house felt different today, heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me, suffocating me. That's when I saw it. The basement door was wide open. I hadn't left it open. I knew that for a fact. I hadn't dared to go near it after that last night, but somehow it had been opened. I stood frozen in place, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. And then, without thinking, my feet carried me toward it. Something inside me urged me to go down there again, to confront whatever had been lurking in the dark. I didn't want to. I knew I shouldn't, but I had no choice. I descended the stairs, each step feeling like a betrayal of my own sanity. The basement was just as cold as before, and the darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides. I couldn't even see the flashlight, it was gone. But as I stood there, trying to adjust to the gloom, I heard it, the faintest sound, a whisper. It was low, almost inaudible, but it sent a chill through my spine. "Come closer." I didn't move. I couldn't move. The voice wasn't just in my head. It was coming from the shadows, from the corners of the basement where the light could never reach. It was no longer a whisper. It was a command. "Sit down." I wanted to run. I wanted to flee from this place and never look back. But my body wouldn't listen. My legs moved of their own accord, dragging me toward the center of the basement, toward the chair. The chair was back, but this time there was something different about it. The stains on the floor around it were darker, almost black, and they seemed to form shapes. Shapes that resembled symbols? I wasn't sure. It was as though the entire basement had been marked. But it didn't matter. All I could focus on was the chair. I had to sit in it. And before I knew it, I was sitting there, unable to stop myself. The air was thick, oppressive, and I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I could feel the presence, something far beyond human, standing just out of reach, watching me. Then, in the reflection of the cracked mirror that had appeared out of nowhere, I saw it. The figure was standing behind me, its face still twisted, grinning that sickening grin. Its eyes burned like coals, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The thing had no body. It was only a shadow, a darkness that had no shape or form. It was pure malevolence, and it was here. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, my chest too heavy to breathe. The figure in the mirror moved closer, and I could feel its presence in the room. It was all around me, its cold, suffocating aura pressing in on me like the weight of 1,000 hands. Suddenly, the light from the basement flickered, and the room plunged into total darkness. I heard the sound of footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, dragging. Get out. But this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a command. And the voice wasn't the same. It wasn't the voice of the thing behind me. It was mine. That was the moment I knew. The house had taken something from me. It had taken my mind, my sanity, and it was now taking my soul. I managed to stumble to my feet, my body numb and unresponsive. My legs carried me, but not with my own will. I couldn't stop moving even though I tried. The door at the top of the stairs swung open on its own, as though the house had decided to let me leave. But when I stepped outside, the world wasn't what I remembered. The street outside was wrong, twisted. The houses looked warped, as if the entire neighborhood had been stretched and bent into some grotesque shape. The sky above was dark, sickly, and the worst part was, when I looked down at my own hands, I saw that they weren't my own anymore. They were the hands of the thing in the chair. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Everything around me felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The ground beneath my feet seemed unstable, shifting as if it weren't real. The sky too seemed wrong, too dark, too heavy. The whole world was twisted, alien, as if I had stepped into a parallel dimension where nothing made sense. I looked at my hands again, hands that weren't mine. The skin was pale, unnaturally so, and my fingers were long, too long, with sharp nails that looked like they could cut through bone. The sight of them made my stomach churn, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. This wasn't me. This wasn't who I was. I took a step forward, but the ground beneath me gave way, like I was walking on something unstable, a surface too thin to support me. My foot slipped, and I fell to my knees, my hands sinking into the dirt, feeling the cool, wet earth that clung to me like a curse. I scrambled to get up, but as I did, I heard it. The voice. It was behind me again. Leave. Leave now. I spun around, but I didn't see anything. The world seemed to stretch and twist around me, as though it were alive, watching me, pulling me in. I had to leave. I had to get out of there before it was too late. I couldn't stay, but no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I tried to go, the house, the thing that had consumed me, was always there, lurking just beyond my reach, waiting. I ran down the street, my legs stiff and uncooperative, like they were being dragged by some unseen force. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost, drowned by the oppressive silence that surrounded me. The only sound that echoed in the air was the relentless thudding of my heart, pounding in my chest, like it was begging to escape. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. Everything was wrong. Nothing felt real anymore. I couldn't even remember what day it was, or how long I had been in that house. It felt like I had been living in that nightmare for an eternity, but it had only just begun. Eventually, I stumbled upon the woods at the edge of the town. I didn't know why I ended up there, but something pushed me to keep moving. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching down to drag me back into the darkness. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let whatever had happened to me catch up. I ran deeper into the forest, the world around me growing darker and darker with each step. The trees closed in on me, the air thick and suffocating, and I could feel the weight of the house behind me, chasing me, pulling me back. And then I heard it again, that voice. You cannot escape. I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was loud, clear, and it sounded different, almost like it was coming from everywhere at once. I turned around, expecting to see something standing behind me, but there was nothing there, just the forest and the silence. But then I saw it. In the distance, through the trees, I saw the outline of the house. The house I had just left. It was there, right in front of me, as if it had never moved, never gone away. And standing in the doorway watching me was the figure, the thing. It was smiling, its face stretched unnaturally wide, its glowing eyes boring into me, as though it had been waiting all along. Couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, my limbs numb. It was as if I had become a part of the house, unable to escape, forever trapped in its grip. And then I realized the truth. I was never going to escape. The house had already taken me. It had already claimed me the moment I walked through that door. And now there was no way out. I don't know how much time passed after I saw the figure in the doorway. It felt like hours or maybe seconds. Time had stopped making sense a long time ago. All I knew was that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The house, the presence that had been slowly eating away at me, consuming me from the inside out, was here. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, its long, twisted limbs stretching out from the darkness. Its eyes glowed like embers in a dying fire, burning with malevolent intent. The smile on its face widened, as if it were savoring the fear that coursed through my veins, the terror that made my blood freeze. "Welcome home," it whispered, its voice a sickening blend of my own and something darker, something ancient. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my feet were glued to the ground, as if the earth itself had wrapped its roots around me, pulling me back. And then I understood. The house wasn't just a house. It wasn't just some abandoned property on the outskirts of town. It was alive. It had been waiting for someone, anyone, to come along. And when I stepped inside, when I dared to think I could make it mine, it had marked me, claimed me as its own. The house had been watching, listening, and now it wanted to keep me. Forever. The figure reached out to me with its long, crooked fingers, its touch icy cold, sending a shock of electricity through my body. It felt like it was pulling my very soul from within me, slowly tearing me apart. And as it touched me, the air around me seemed to warp, as though the very fabric of reality was tearing, splitting open. I could see glimpses of other places, other times, images flashing in front of my eyes. I saw people who had been here before, trapped in the house just like me, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies distorted, their eyes wide with fear. They were still here, still caught in the house's grip, unable to escape. And I saw myself. I saw what I was becoming. The reflection in the glass was no longer human. It was just a shadow, a wraith-like figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. I had become it, part of the house, a part of whatever evil had taken root there. "You are one of us now," the figure said, its voice growing louder, more powerful. "There is no escape." And then I understood. The house didn't just want me, needed me. It needed to feed on my fear, my despair. It needed to keep me locked in this never-ending nightmare, so that it could grow stronger, feeding off the souls of anyone who dared to enter. I wasn't the first to fall prey to it, and I wouldn't be the last. I tried to fight it. I tried to scream, to run, to claw my way out, but the force that held me was too powerful. It pulled me back toward the house, toward the darkness that now seemed to be swallowing everything around me. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. The voices, the shadows, the twisted figures of those who had been consumed before me. The house, the thing that had once been a home, a place of comfort. It was now my prison. And as I was dragged back toward the door, I realized something terrifying. There was no way out. I was never going to leave. I was already gone. It wasn't just the house that had changed. It was me. I could feel it now, inside me, crawling beneath my skin like an infection. My body, my mind, they no longer belonged to me. The house had claimed them, twisted them, and now I was nothing more than a vessel, a hollow shell walking its darkened halls. The walls seemed to pulse around me as I was dragged back toward the heart of the house, the place where all the evil began. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, but it didn't matter anymore. The house knew my every step, my every thought. There was no escaping it. I tried to fight, but my body moved against my will. My hands reached out, grasping at the air, desperate for any sign of hope, any sign of escape, but there was nothing. The air felt thick, stifling, like the house itself was suffocating me, pulling me into its depths. And then, I found myself standing in front of the basement door again. The door that had first drawn me in. The door that had led me to this nightmare. But this time, it wasn't just a door. It was a gateway, portal, a threshold between the living and the dead. It swung open on its own, as though welcoming me back, as though it had been waiting for me to return. The basement was no longer empty. It was alive. The shadows in the corners seemed to move, shift, like they were reaching for me, trying to pull me into their embrace. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of rot, of something far older and far darker than anything I could ever comprehend. And there, sitting in the center of the room, was the chair. The same chair. But now it wasn't just an object. It was a symbol, a throne. I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to sit in it, to embrace my new role, to become a part of the house, to become one with the darkness. The figure from before, my reflection, was there too, waiting for me. It smiled that twisted, sickening grin, its hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. It stepped forward, its long, skeletal hands reaching for me. "You've come home," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. "Now take your place, take your throne." And I did. I couldn't fight it anymore, couldn't resist. I sat down in the chair, and the moment I did, I felt the house surge inside me, wrapping itself around my soul, tightening its grip. I could feel the lives of those who had come before me, their souls trapped in the walls, feeding the house's insatiable hunger. Their whispers, their cries, all mingled with mine, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I was part of the house now. I am the house now. And anyone who comes here will feel the same pull, the same hunger. They'll hear my voice, calling them, guiding them to the basement. They'll sit in the chair, and they'll become one with the darkness too. And the cycle will continue.